Our next speaker is a technology leader, an entrepreneur, and above all, a problem solver. Started his career as a developer at AT&T. He has always been close to technology in various roles, like being a senior developer at HP, director of engineering at Trove Media, and Bankrate. As a CTO at Shortlist Professionals, he has built a platform that screens candidates using predictive, chat-based interviews and online competency-based assessments that help companies build world-class teams. Throughout his engineering leadership, he thought that he was flying blind without the career insights of his team, whether they are getting better or worse, or were moving slower or faster. Although he continued to make process changes, he was never confident to celebrate the success due to lack of data to augment his gut feelings. And to solve this problem, he founded Insightly Analytics, a B2B SaaS solution to help companies improve engineering productivity and release better softwares faster without team burnout. As he continues to solve the engineering leadership challenge, today he is here to share his view on measuring engineering productivity. Please give a round of applause to welcome the founder and CEO of Insightly Analytics, Mr. Sudheer Bandaru.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. We started when it was good morning, it's good afternoon. Hope your energy levels are good. I'm only between you and the great event of book launch and followed by lunch. But very great to be packed in a room of high energy, lot of humbleness, and congratulations, Ayush, not just on the book launch, but the whole fitness transformation you have showed what can be possible. And it's very heart-touching to see your family witnessing your great success here. And Praveen, how you have been supporting Ayush and meausre. I'm like amazing to be part of this journey. And thanks for inviting me to this event. I don't know if you planned for my keynote speaker to be at this point of time after all the other keynote speakers, or was it a coincidence? But it felt like, seeing a series of problems that engineering leaders are facing, and like, now I come here to kind of deliver the solution. All right, just let me figure out this thing and see how we are doing. So this is more about how we should introduce. I'm like, I've been a technology leader for quite some time, over a decade. Started my career as a software developer, and always felt engineering management was a pain in many ways. And I only realized, I'm like, how big of a pain is this? I'm like, is this just for me or everybody in the space? Talking to engineering leaders from the Valley and all, realized it was a pain beyond what I was just going through it. And today I realized when I was chatting with Samir, I'm like, realized that he was talking about solving a similar problem. In fact, even talking about a similar topic today. Samir, thank you for that. I'm happy that, you're thinking in the same angle. I'm also happy that, you got to use the time to share your wisdom and advice with us while I will go over this Insightly Analytics and what we are trying to do here. So like I said, I'm starting from a developer and then getting into engineering management, I felt this was a time to start the solution about how the pain point, what we are going through. And that's what the birth of Insightly Analytics. All right. First of all, we talked about so many different panel discussion today that's talking about predictability of deliveries and also about how do you ensure you're on time and all of those things, right? Most of the answers were all completely subjective. And over a period of time, engineering leaders gain the experience to say that we are going to miss the deadline or we are not going to miss the deadline, and how do you handle the communication and all, right? But how do we bring in some objectivity into the discussion? So that is where we wanted to bring in data-driven culture to engineering teams. And that's the start of understanding. First of all, why should we even measure productivity, correct? So if you see this, it's a whopping $300 billion lost per year just in engineering inefficiency. And everybody thinks you want to kind of, 96% of the managers claim engineering productivity is their number one priority. Correct? While this is a big problem, and a lot of engineering teams also outperform their lower quartile engineering teams in terms of business performance. Imagine a low-performing engineering team company making $1 million in revenue. Similar company with an elite engineering team can make $4 million in revenue. That's a very small example of the impact of an elite engineering team can do. And the last one, if you can see, this is about, we're all talking about attrition, and like we were laughing about like, how do we attract top talent and all of those things. But just building a great engineering team also allows you to bring in a lot of referrals. Like Chetna was telling, referral network plays a vital role in building a startup, right? Just build a great engineering team, and they're 2.5 times more likely to introduce and refer you to great engineering talent. Correct? So I hope this is something that will be convincing enough for you to say why we need to measure engineering productivity in the first place. But what not to measure, right? This is more important. This has been an age-old problem for over like 10, 20 years or whatever since the software was born. And this has been an age-old problem. But it is very important to measure what matters the most, right? We want to make sure we don't want to measure that will bring in wrong behaviors in the team. And if you see, we don't want to measure lines of code. We don't want to measure because of it incentivizes bloated software and it's rewarding a wrong behavior in the team, correct? We don't want to measure time spent on the ID. There are some plugins and tools that will tell you how much time an engineer is spending on a particular ID or the screen and so on. It's very easy. Engineers are very smart. They can easily game it. And that's not what their motivation is for, correct? And you don't want to measure all the stuff that how many hours they're spending in the office and how much time they're kind of story points. Story points is a very interesting thing. A lot of people status quo, even including me, I was measuring story points, but that is only an estimate. It only tells what you are expected to do, right? So piggybacking on story points to say I'm going to improve productivity. What happens when you say I have 20 story points this sprint, I want you to improve the productivity and change it to 30. The same work gets 30 story points. Anybody face this? Right? So story points is good. We want to start with it. But what is more important is what was done against it. How good are our estimates? Correct? So these are the stuff that we don't want to measure. But what we really want to measure is something that we will be talking about today. Yeah, definitely not time in the office and all. So while we want to measure the outcomes, all of these things, why is it so hard to measure? And we all talked about it. I think we have, through all the conversations, both on the panel and talking in the room today, it's very clear that we want to measure productivity. Even in the beginning, we said 96% of the engineering leaders want to measure productivity. But what is stopping them from measuring it in the first place? Correct? Because the problem is, it's very hard to measure. The lack of visibility, right? The data is sitting there. All the code that people are writing is all sitting there in the Git somewhere, raw data, but you do not have any dashboards on top of it. Jira has beautiful dashboards, but the dashboards are only good if there is Jira hygiene. How many teams can claim that my Jira team hygiene is there, and whenever the stuff is done and they move from stage A to stage B to stage C immediately. If that is not done immediately, then your graphs are all meaningless, correct? So how do we bring all of those things, right? The data is also sitting in siloed tools. We are talking about some data. What you're planning to do is sitting in Jira. What you're actually done is sitting in Git. How do you correlate the data to make sense out of it, right? Engineering leaders are pressed for business outcomes, and it's not about, we are not paid to we are not motivated to solve these problems internally. How many teams can really afford an engineering team that can really build these tools internally? I'm not saying it is not hard, I'm not saying it's impossible to build, but it is a distraction from your core business if you want to build an internal tool like this. ThoughtWorks, for example, is able to afford it, it's able to build it, but how many companies can build it? Well, it's a distraction from your core business, correct? And finally, we also have a lot of startup founders here, and we'll talk about, we've been managing marketing teams, sales teams. It's very simple and it's as clear to say, what are your metrics? You say you market qualified leads, sales qualified leads, customer support, right? NPS. Tell me one metric that we all can align on, standardize on, say, this is how I can say my engineering team is elite. Right? So we need to bring in that culture, right? because as the CEOs of the companies, they are struggling to say, I'm able to easily measure and quantify the outcome of each and every of my function, but not my engineering team, which also ends up to be one of the most expensive team. So how do we solve this problem is the talk of the day. And one of the fundamental principle I took when I was building this startup is, being a startup software developer, how would I feel somebody wants to measure my productivity? Right? Would I feel comfortable about it? Probably all of you may have tried some versions of these building these tools and understanding what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. What I realized talking to people is that engineers would not like to measure the output. Engineers are comfortable if you measure the outcome. I'll tell you the difference between these two things. Output is like what I said, what not to measure, lines of code, how many hours you're sitting, all of those kind of things, right? How much time you spend on the IDE. Outcome, like Akash was talking about and all, outcomes are more about delivering value to your end user. What is that form? Are the engineering teams delivering something that the business wants? Are the engineering teams generally busy? Yes, they are busy. Are they fixing bugs? Or are they kind of innovating? Where is the effort going? We do not have that visibility. We are making gut decisions, correct? So we want to make sure, we want to solve these problems while there is a great intention both for everybody in the engineering hierarchy to solve this problem. It is hard. That is the challenge what we are trying to solve here at Insightly. I'm realizing, yeah. So what to measure, correct? Any of you familiar with DORA metrics? Have you heard of these? So for the same obvious pain points, what I've been stating, there has been a lot of people from the GitHub research labs, Google DevOps labs. DORA is like DevOps research assessment. They've been facing these problems. Large companies are facing these problems, not just small companies, correct? And they went ahead and started a research with 32,000 companies across the globe to say, what are the factors that would differentiate a low performing versus a high performing team? And they called it DORA metrics, and they've been releasing these metrics for the last couple of years, which are very, 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 very well adopted by the engineering community. And it is starting to be mostly in the Western, and it's starting to be adopted more in the Indian community lately. And DORA metrics will really tell more of outcome-based metrics that will tell if the engineering team is really benefiting the business as an overall goal. It doesn't take into consideration any of the output metrics, and it's talking about deployment frequency, right? How often do you deploy? Because today is a very high competition with every product, we were talking about in the panel. It's very important that when your competitor is able to release things faster, you got to be releasing it even faster. So deployment frequency is something that would tell you, give your business performance completely a nudge to go one step higher, correct? And the same thing, cycle time. We were talking about lead time. How long does it take from the time your engineer starts coding to the time it goes to production, or at least from the idea stage to production? So that's what we call the lead time. And mean time to restore. Going fast, breaking things is not for everybody. But so while you want to go fast, you also want to know how long it takes for you to kind of restore your services, correct? Then I can be more confident that's okay, make a mistake. I know you can restore in 1 hour. And finally, change fail percentage, same thing. Hot fixes, what we call it, basically how many hot fixes you're having. I'm are you just delivering stuff making poor choices in the beginning and fixing things later, correct? So if you see these things as a whole, I can talk about this for days, but if you see these 4 metrics, this is the standardization of metrics that are bringing into the engineering culture today. And this is what we're trying to measure, which none of this, if you see, right, all of these are a very team-based, outcome-driven metrics. Not a single engineer would be concerned about using any of these measuring or metrics, measuring any of these metrics, correct? And then comes another one. This is a very complex problem. Just measuring these 4 metrics is not going to solve this whole problem of engineering productivity. And then comes in space metrics. This is also a very trending research from GitHub and a lot of these big companies, which are talking about satisfaction and well-being. Are the engineers really happy about what they're doing? Like Sheetal was talking about, are the engineers being taken care of? Are they productive enough? You cannot be productive if you yourself are not doing really well. And then performance, what is the performance of your engineering organization? Activity, how are they active 1 day a week, 5 days a week? If they're active only 1 day a week, what is stopping them from delivering more things, right? How can we move things faster? Efficiency, flow, how many times engineers get disturbed? Probably 20 times, 40 times, 100 times. There is enough research that shows people are getting hardly finding 30 minutes of a flow time in a day, because they're continuously being bombarded with requirements or business people asking for status updates, all of those things. Engineering is an art. We were talking about it. How do you paint a great art? How do you build great products when you do not have the time to get into the flow? Correct. But do we have a visibility? What is a flow time for our engineers? And finally, collaboration, right? It's a team sport. Somebody has to write the code, somebody has to review the code, somebody has to push the code. So that whole collaboration ecosystem has to be really well and smooth for people to be moving things faster and move fast, better. So these are the couple of high-level principles what we are taking. And if you go to the next slide, please. See, these are the drivers of engineering excellence. And if you see this is a very complex, what I showed you on the previous DORA metrics and SPACE metrics are very simple metrics. But you see, this is a very complex thing. I'm like, a lot of stuff here. How do you build a lean product development? I'm like, how do you build a lean management? How much of work is in progress? How much of work was already done but not pushed for whatever reason? What is the collaboration? The interplay between all of these things is very complex. The problem what we are trying to solve is bring in the interplay between various stages of the software development team, people, and process, and simplify to death, so that you kind of put that into a simple dashboards that would allow engineering managers, leaders, empower them with data like never before, where they are still continuing to take their gut decisions, but they also have a data on the back pocket to augment their gut decisions. So that's what we are trying to do. Next slide, please. This is a peek into Insightly. Again, we're a very early stage startup, and I know we have a lot of amazing founders here talking about great product. So I will pick your brain on how to build a great product. This is a small screenshot that would tell you very simply. And also, we don't believe engineering is something we can come up with marketing or sales, where you can pick a single metric and you talk about it, right? So it is a combination of speed, quality, and throughput. Depending on where you are in the organization or the stage of the development process, sometimes you want to go fast, break things, it's okay. Sometimes, you want to kind of go slow at the stake of customers, right? So all of those are the choices that you have as an engineering leader. But having a visibility into saying, am I doing the right decision is where we come in. And this one simply shows the cycle time is how long does it take for you to go from stage, from the time engineer starts coding to the time you start to deliver. And this shows cycle time is longer here. It shows something 4 days. And it also shows me why it took 4 days. Why are we slowing down? It shows the review time is taking longer. If a leader is kind of empowered with this data, I can immediately go take some action so that these actionable insights allows me to build a better organization. That's pretty much, I didn't want to do so much of a product sale or anything sales here, but just wanted to give you a perception of the direction where we are trying to do. And I'm so delighted to be meeting a lot of engineering leaders here today towards communicating our vision here in terms of bringing the data-driven culture to engineering teams, and kind of bring that, adopt this kind of culture in everyday lifestyle of managing engineering teams, and make engineering managers' life little better to deliver better software faster. Where I can't resist to share, we've been we've done a seed round, and and we yesterday, earlier this week, we've been sharing about this press release. If you can go to the next slide. We've been covered by TechCrunch, Forbes, MarketWatch, a lot of amazing media. And I was so touched to see the validation of the problem what we are trying to solve here. And it's really interesting on how the whole international globally, everybody is really excited about solving this problem of engineering productivity. Ayush, Praveen, thank you so much for the time again, and for inviting me. A pleasure to be here.